Zvuk misli.
Podcast Instituta za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju.
Welcome to yet another episode of Sound of Thoughts. Today we have the privilege to be in the company of Birgit Sauer. Birgit is a professor of political science at the University of Vienna. She is doubtlessly one of the major authorities in the research of right-wing populism, especially when it comes to gender, migrations, and how the right-wing populists pervert those ideas and phenomena and transform them into tools of their effective governing political machinery. Last but not least, Birgit is a friend of our institute. She was the PI of the Austrian research team on the Cultures of Rejection project, on which we have worked on together. So this episode might be seen also as a continuation of a conversation that has begun already some time ago. Birgit, hello.
Hi, Andrea. Thanks so much for inviting me to this talk. I'm very pleased and I'm very honored to get in a conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm also impatient. So I propose that we start our conversation within a rather general framework and shed some light on the conceptual side of your research. So in your writings, the notions of right-wing populism, gender, and affects intertwine closely in order to offer a critical feminist perspective on our contemporary political conjuncture. Well, it is widely known that right-wing populists are seeing gender theory, or what they call gender ideology, the bogus man, as an enemy of the conservative masculine hegemony. The place of affects in this political juxtaposition seems less obvious, somehow more abstract, no? Could you please say a few words about how right-wing populism use and abuse via effective governing, it is your term, directing them against women, gender minorities, migrants, and all other social groups that they label as others?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I work on affect and emotion for quite some time. I think I started in the late 1990s. As a feminist, I was always upset because emotions have been excluded from democracy, from politics at all. And by doing this, also women have been excluded by being too emotional and so on from politics. And then suddenly there was a debate about the politics of fear of right-wing populist and authoritarian parties and movements. And then everybody was afraid, saying, oh, wow, they are destroying our liberal democracy. So, but what then? Do we have then to tighten these affects? Do we have exclude affects from politics again in order to prohibit that right-wingers manipulate the population through emotion? So, and I found this a wrong way of perceiving right-wing mobilization. But I thought, well, these issue of emotion and affect in liberal democracies have been given to the right-wingers, and they saw their opportunities that the other parties were not that emotional or tried to curb emotions. And that's why they started to explicitly start their effective campaign. And I think these effective campaigns, they are, of course, based on their antagonistic strategies of mobilization. And what we can say is that populism, right-wing, but some say also left-wing populism, is based on two antagonisms. And the first antagonism, we could say it's a vertical antagonism, saying we, the people, against the elites. And the second antagonism is we, the people, against others, meaning all people that are constructed as others. And these antagonisms, of course, they need affect and emotion. So this is why right-wing authoritarian actors use emotion to create their antagonism and to legitimize somehow how they understand and want to construct the people. What I also think what is important in this respect, and I always talk about right-wing authoritarian populism, and I draw on Stuart Hall's notion of authoritarian populism, which he coined for the Thatcher government already. And he says, well, this is a sort of project. So it's an idea, it's a notion of actors to gain, let's say, hegemony over the feelings, the hearts, but also, of course, the consciousness of the population. And it's especially that right-wing authoritarian actors, they aim at changing the structures of feeling. They want to change how societies think, how specific groups of society should think about the fellow citizens, but also should think and feel about those who do not belong. So, and they create, of course, situations of fear, of insecurity. They want to turn this fear into anger. So maybe against the political elite, against mainstream media, but also against especially migrants and Muslim migrants. And at the same time, by creating this fear, they also want to create a sort of exclusive solidarity. All the others should not be part of this solidaristic community, but of course the fellow citizens, they should belong, and they then also should receive feelings of love. So that's why Donald Trump, for instance, always said, well, I love you. Mm-hmm. And that they should also get, let's say, a feeling of hope. So the authoritarian leader also says, well, I'm the savior, and I'll bring you hope that you will have, let's say, a sort of bright future if you, for instance, vote for me. And so I think this is the game, the play, what authoritarian right-wingers do, and I would say across the globe. And what they know and what they learned is that through affectivity and through emotions, people might be made governable. So people might themselves submit under these authoritarian ideas of inequality, of the necessity of leadership, and of course of exclusion. So, and this is why I labeled this also a sort of affective governmentality, and I use Foucault's notion of governmentality to say this is the political strategy, the project of the authoritarian right to make people submit under their rule, yeah, and to believe in this rule. And we could also say with Lauren Berlant, this is a sort of cruel optimism which right-wingers want to implement in their different societies. They give a sort of optimism, a sort of hope, we will save you from all the horrible loss of control or inequality you as native people experienced over the last years. But this, of course, will never come true, this promise. So that's why I think this cruel optimism describes it rather right, because the authoritarian populism, they are not interested, I would say, in the people. They are interested in somehow seizing the power and then at the same time want to disempower what they label the people.
Mm-hmm. And does maybe the notion of trust, the idea of trust that has been, we hear so often that the liberal democracy have lost their trust, the institutions have lost their trust, that we don't trust in democracy anymore, and such things. How do you see it maybe as an umbrella? Do you think that they have taken over? Do you see trust or belief as an affect also, or a more complex phenomenon on the one hand? And just the second maybe thing would be in these affective governmentality strategies, does the unconscious maybe play a role? Because you mentioned the word consciousness, but what about the unconscious?
Yeah, you're right. First, perhaps your first point. Of course, trust plays an important role in the effective mobilization of the authoritarian right, because what they claim is that what they construct as the people, so this is a sort of empty signifier in the sense of Ernesto Laclau, that the people should trust in their strategy, yeah? And of course, what they refer to, and this is no news because this has been discussed for a long time, that in liberal democracies, institutions like elections, like parliaments, but especially politicians, lost the trust of the electorate. So it is an ongoing process that the, let's say, old party system, which has been established in Europe after World War II, for instance, is not trusted anymore because people are disappointed, and they are especially disappointed in the long way of neoliberal restructuring. So people experience that the welfare state was dismantled and they do not have this social security anymore in Western welfare states. They experience that politicians did not, that they made a lot of promises, but that these promises didn't come true. They experience that they lose their jobs. They experience that there was a lot of competition. They experience a lot of shame if they weren't that competitive, for instance. So people had a sense of distrusting the political elite. And the right-wingers took the opportunities of these neoliberal restructuring and presenting themselves as the savior, as giving trust back and giving hope back, and even restoring democracies. That's why all these authoritarian right-wingers say, well, we need more direct democracy to empower the people. But then if you look at their policies they implement, for instance, if they are in power, it's not that they are super welfare oriented, that they want to redistribute wealth to everybody. To the contrary, they also serve, let's say, capitalist interests. But it is then that they want to re-establish trust, of course, which is, well, I would say it's it is a conglomerate of affect and emotion, and it needs a specific structure, feeling structure, to trust in either political elites or media or experts. And you mentioned the psychological dimension of affect and emotion. So, well, I'm a political scientist, and I usually think that what people experience individually is not their only individual experience. So they always refer, that's why I like the Raymond Williams expression of structures of feeling. They always experience feelings and affect in a certain affective structure. And then they acquire, rework these feelings. So a more psychological view would be, for me, from my views, to strongly divide between the inner and the outer. And I think the notion of affect and affective structure underlines the fact that the inner feelings are always connected to an outer structure of feeling or different structures of feeling.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should now just jump back to the let's say to the from the psychological to the political realm, and maybe in the same way, we're not getting too far away. There is. How do you understand the term of illiberalism? It appears, so to say, out of nowhere, huh? But it was very well taken both by liberal and illiberal political elites. Huh? And for example, Orban who is happy to proclaim himself as illiberal. How useful do you find it?
Mm-hmm. Well, to be honest, I do not use the term or the concept illiberal. I think it's a field concept. It's used in the field I study. It's used by right-wingers. It's used by Orban, but it has also been used by Kaczynski in Poland. And it had also been used in Austria by the former leader of the Freedom Party, the right-wing Freedom Party, Heinz Christian Strache. So I think it's not a useful analytical concept because it's this, it's this field term. So, but it was nevertheless, it was, of course, a political scientist, namely Fareed Zakaria, who coined this term at the end of the 1990s. And he wanted to point out that there is a development in liberal democracies, that there are elections, which is the democratic part of liberal democracies, but that there exist countries or democracies where there is no or only rudimentary rule of law, there is no independent judiciary, no human rights, or they are dismantled and media are controlled. So he saw this already, this backsliding, one would say, today in countries like Poland, for instance. But this concept never was taken up in science, in political science, for instance, but it was taken up, and as you said, affirmatively by Viktor Orban. I think in 2014, in a speech, he was very proud, saying, well, Hungary is an illiberal democracy, and he wanted to express that Hungary is different from Western liberal democracies. So this was his impetus to say, we are different from this Western democracy, and Hungary is not only an illiberal democracy, but he said in the same speech, it's a Christian democracy. So, and this is the specific characteristic of Hungarian democracy. And that's why I think it's not a helpful term if we want to understand what is going on or what these authoritarian right-wing actors are doing. To my view is, of course, they want to destroy democracy. They want to destroy the sovereignty of the people. And of course, they know and they knew how to use liberal democratic instruments like elections and parliamentary majorities, for instance, to destroy democracy. But they do not want to establish, let's say, equality and difference. They do not want to establish a solidaristic agency of the people, but they want to destroy the people and people's rights, as well as, of course, rights of minorities. So I think illiberal is the wrong expression. And I have one more. And I think I have one more. I hesitate to use the expression because if we say, well, we criticize illiberal democracy, then we run the danger of legitimizing liberal democracy. And I myself, what I did as a feminist my whole academic life is to criticize especially liberal democracy for being exclusive, for not recognizing feminist claims, for instance, but for being a way of governing, a bourgeois, we could say, way of governing capitalist and patriarchal societies. So liberal democracy is not that what I would see as a feminist, diverse utopia. So I would say liberal democracy is the institutionalization of a capitalist, patriarchal, heteronormative order. And that's why I am afraid if we just say, well, we criticize these illiberal democracy, then we do not see that liberal democracy always have been based on the exploitation of the working class, of women, and of course of the expropriation of racialized people in colonies. So that's why I think we have to be critical also about liberal democracy.
Yeah, so in the end of the day, maybe this opposition between liberal and illiberal, let's say, regimes are just apparent, and to some extent they coincide, and they coincide exactly on that level of domination and hegemony that they perpetrate. But both of them are masculine political projects. This is a very, very important part of your work. So you claim that right-wing populism is a masculinist project. In your text, you quite clearly claim that right-wing populism is a male phenomenon, or even more so a project of masculinist identity politics. Huh? The political science discourse on populism is still overly cautious to call the things by their proper name. Huh? So thank you for this uncompromising stance. Could you explain what is male about right-wing populism, and why do you consider it a project, and how do you understand this particular identity politics?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started to work on these anti-gender campaigning of the authoritarian right. You mentioned in the beginning of our conversation this, what they label gender ideology. So I was interested in that. But then I found, of course, they criticized the scientific concept gender, gender studies, gender mainstreaming as an equality strategy. But I found also that they focus very much on men and masculinity. And what I found in mainstream political science research is that right-wing parties are men's parties. So they are labeled as men's parties, Männerparteien, even the German term is sometimes used. And there are several characteristics which makes political science think that they are men's parties. And this is mainly that these parties overall have a male constituency and male party membership. They also have an overrepresentation of male parliamentary representatives because they are against party quotas. So you can see there is an overrepresentation of men. They also have male leadership, but we can talk about this later because we see there are changes. We know all these female right-wing icons now. Mm-hmm. And a fourth point is, of course, that less women vote for radical right-wing parties than men do. So this is why in political science, these parties are labeled as men's parties. So I was interested in why do mainly men, either with low educational levels or out of work, for instance, why do men vote for these parties? Why are they attracted by these parties? And I said, well, I go into the ideology, which is usually party programs, but of course, not only as a political scientist, I know people do not read party programs. So there must be other forms of mobilization. And I found a lot of material in these anti-gender mobilizations across Europe, Western and Eastern Europe, but also across the globe. And what is interesting in this, I found in my research, I always ask myself, why do they jump on gender? Why that? It's not that an important issue in society, yeah? Well, welfare, redistribution, social policy, health policy might be much more important. Why is it gender? But now what I found in my research is that this gender is important for the mobilization of what we would say the new right. So what we can find in Europe, especially in Western Europe, and it was first the case in France, is that right-wing parties after World War II changed that's why I call this political project. So, and they transformed from old right-wing parties into new right-wing parties. And the old parties, so especially the Front National in France, but also the Austrian Freedom Party. This party was founded right after World War II by old Nazis. And there are also right-wingers in Germany. So it's not that it's a new phenomenon in these countries, but what was new is that the old right-wingers, old Nazis, one could say, transformed into a new right. And they changed their strategy. They were aware that after World War II, they were not able to seize power or to conquer the state apparatus. But they said, well, we first have to gain cultural hegemony. And they used the notion of hegemony, but by the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, and turned it into their right-wing strategy, saying, well, we first have to win the hearts, the ideas, the bodies, the emotions of the people. And then when we have when we have won the people, we then might get into government position, into state positions. So, this new project of hegemony, of making their authoritarian ideas a sort of common sense, that people believe that it's important to submit under these authoritarian rule. So this was the project of the new right. And I think they have been rather successful with this project of just trying to take up issues which might move people. And they just had to wait for a good moment, for a kairos, when these cultural hegemony allowed them to then also get government positions. And we see that these kairos developed during the late 1990s and then 2000. And now comes gender into the play, because they found that of course, every person somehow feels, knows he, she has a gender, yeah? And that's why these right-wingers joined the anti-gender movement, which was first launched by the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a right-wing project, but it was this right-wing idea of somehow getting into people's hearts and minds. And now they found, well, common sense is that everybody is either man or either woman. So that they wanted to re-establish this gender binary and heteronormativity. And they just picked up these gender struggles, which contested the notion, the scientific deconstructive notion of gender. So they wanted to, we could say, re-establish this gender binary, and then they had, one could say, a sort of chain of equivalence, saying, well, this concept, deconstructive concept of gender, destroys the natural order of the family. It destroys the natural order of the nation, because it encourages women to divorce. It encourages abortions. And this destroys family and the nation. And so on. So this is one part of this anti-gender mobilization, which is, of course, also a nativist, a nationalistic project. But the other part is that in this discourse against gender, these right-wingers present men as victims. They present men, masculinity, manhood as victim of gender equality, politics, and they can draw already on a long existing tradition of fathers' rights groups in Western Europe, also of masculinist men groups on the manosphere in the internet. So they combined this anti-gender struggle with these masculinist struggle. So, and I labeled this whole complex as masculinist identity politics because what I found is that on the one hand, right-wingers create this victim of manhood, and on the other hand, they present a solution. They promise to re-establish male, masculine, sovereign, and especially white identity. So this male or masculinist identity politics has two dimensions. First, let's say, destroying masculinity, saying, well, men, white men are victims of women, of mothers who rob children from father, of feminists and equality politicians who rob the jobs from qualified men. They are victims of Muslim men, Muslim immigrants, because these Muslim immigrants rape their white wives and women. This was especially after the violent attacks in Cologne at the change of the year in 2015. Of course, this is an argument of othering Muslim men, but it's also, let's say, an argument of saying, well, our white masculine sexuality is endangered by these Muslim men. And it's also a sort of discourse where these Muslim men are also envied. Because what I found in the documents I was reading, and especially Austrian and German right-wingers, is that, well, these white men envy Muslim masculinity, which allegedly is allowed to be aggressive, is allowed to take women, while they themselves are domesticized through feminism for a long time. So this is another dimension of this victimization. And of course, also white masculinity is victimized, for instance, by homosexual masculinity. So this is the one dimension, these victimization. And then, of course, the right-wingers, they promise to re-establish male, white, soldier masculinity, a sort of aggressive masculinity. They want to give back to white males the right to be aggressive. For instance, there is what I've really found interesting. There is a German parliamentary representative from the German right-wing Alternative for Germany, Mark Jongen. He says that German men need a training of their thymos. And he refers to Platon's idea of different forces within bodies, and this thymos is, more aggressive. And he says, well, German men have lost their masculinity, so we have to train their aggressiveness again. Also, the identitarian movement, which is a sort of youth movement in Germany, they organize what they label White Boys Summer Camp, where young men can do physical trainings and they do games reenacting the struggles and the fights of the Spartan army against the Athenic polis and things like that. So they promise to re-establish a bodily strong and aggressive male identity. So, and I think this is why I labeled this masculinist identity politics of the right. And this is one component, I would say, why right-wing parties are attractive for men, although they are also attractive for women, for instance.
Yes, that opens quite a lot of questions. But maybe just let me remark, there's some difference between what we see as the right-wing populism here in Serbia, or maybe also in neighboring countries in the region. There is no open auto-victimization of men. You know, that masculinist identity project, the constellation, the rather. I think that the main victim is not man and its manlyhood, but rather the family. You know, they cannot go. They're not so open with themselves, maybe as the right wing populists in the West are, and they have no men protection groups. But actually, there is a substitute. Form or actor that is family, so, and who protects the family is the man. So the man is attacked, but only via the family, so not directly. And that brings me to maybe to the next question that would concern the difference between the Eastern and the Western Europe populisms. That could be interesting. The anti-gender mobilizations are becoming a quotidian reality in the whole Europe. That there is no exception to that, I think. Rogers Brubaker offered an important differentiation between Eastern and Western clusters of populism based on where the major threats come from. And in one cluster, we have a return to the identitarian Christianism, a secularist posture, a philosemitic stance, and an ostensibly liberal defense of gender equality, gay rights, and freedom of speech. From this perspective, illiberalism is inherent to Islam, and as you told just before, and is therefore threatening the liberal civilized Europe. So on the one hand, the East Central Europe's populism rests mostly on the national semantics. Liberalism is bad because it presents itself as yet another form of foreign domination, today expressed as a dictate from Brussels. But now, if we take this differentiation as meaningful, the question is why there are also increasingly anti-gender campaigns in the Western parts of Europe. Author like Will Mannon's Political Economy of Populism do bearing in mind in the strength of anti-gender mobilization in post-socialist Europe, or for that matter, Brazil, maybe, why not? How would you explain the sources of anti-gender mobilization, which is, despite the regional differences, a true global and transitional phenomenon today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we worked with Brubaker's differentiation also in another project, and we found it, well, it's of course a little bit too rough, but nevertheless, it's interesting. We compared in this project Austria and Slovenian right-wing mobilization and media campaigns. And what we indeed found is that in Austria, there was more mobilization of fear against the Christian civilization, while in Slovenia, we found more mobilization of fear against the nation and then mobilization of protection of national borders against Muslims, for instance. So I would say there are differences, of course. I'm not sure if there are differences only between the West and the Eastern countries, because Western as well as Eastern countries have rather different historical capitalist trajectories as well as state socialist trajectories. And what we found also with respect, and you mentioned that already, with Slovenia, there the anti-gender mobilization wasn't that much against the deconstructive concept of gender, but it was especially against same-sex marriage. So, and there the Jančar government opposed same-sex marriage, of course, together with the Catholic Church, which is also an important player in some of the Eastern countries. So I think there are interesting differences. But what we can see in countries like Hungary, but also in Poland, is that they fully support the Catholic Church anti-gender mobilization, and they see gender again as a threat to the heterosexual family. This is what we found, as you said, for Serbia, in Hungary as well as in Poland, for instance. And they want to protect children and mainly the family, what they of course see as a natural order and a natural basis for the nation. And of course, they frame in this mobilization abortion as murder, and they deny reproductive rights to women. But what we also see is that especially Poland and Hungary, they use their anti-gender campaign as a campaign against what they see as the decadent West. We can find this also in Russia, where the Orthodox Church is supporting this anti-gender campaign. So, and in Poland, anti-gender, anti-abortion activists, they call gender mainstreaming as Ebola from Brussels, so a deadly virus from Brussels. It's really weird, yeah. It's really weird just to.
But by the way, Ebola is, you know, we know where Ebola is the most spread. So there is a racist component to it. It's crazy. It's a crazy.
Yeah. It's really
what a formulation. It's
yeah.
It's horrifying. It's horrifying.
It's really horrible, and we call this therefore as a sort of reverse colonialism or subverted colonialism, because what these Polish and Hungarian activists do, and I think it's the same for the Orthodox Church in Russia, or what Putin did to legitimize the war against Ukraine, is, well, the West is colonizing us, yeah? And that's why we have to defend our own national identity against this EU colonialist attacks. Of course, then at the same time, they promote their racist and white agenda. And I think this is important for, it's not astonishing, it's not new. But we have to see that all these authoritarian right-wing actors combine their anti-gender, their homophobic mobilization, always with a racist mobilization against immigrants, of course, but against all people they racialize in their communication. Yeah. So, and what is interesting, and you asked for the resources and why it is a global phenomenon, these anti-gender mobilizations. So first we could see, well, these gender is something which holds together, which brings together rather different right-wing actors, together with other anti-gender actors, namely, for instance, Catholic, but also very conservative Orthodox and Muslim churches and communities. So gender is what Esther Kovacs and Andrea Pető labeled the symbolic glue for these actors. I labeled this gender or anti-gender, again with Ernesto Laclau, as an empty signifier, because this is used as a sort of aim or end of a discourse where you can bring together a lot of discursive projects in this gender project. Anti-EU project, anti-immigration project, anti-media and government elite project. So this is why gender is so useful across the globe, and even Bolsonaro used that on jumping on these anti-gender mobilization, because, as I said before, gender is instrumentalized to create this hegemony of right-wing authoritarianism. So this is one point why I think gender is used in rather different regions of the world, you could say. And the second point is that the anti-gender movement is supported by the most global actor, and this is the Catholic Church. Yeah, this is why you find anti-gender mobilization in Latin America. Yeah, that's why you partly find it in Africa, where the Catholic Church is strong, and they bring this topos together with their population policy in these regions. And of course, they also fund some of this activism. But there are other global actors funded either by right-wingers or by pro-life activists. And this is the platform, the digital platform Citizen Go. And they launch anti-abortion, anti-gender mobilizations across the globe, especially in Europe. They organized online petition against, for instance, the Lunacek report in the European Parliament, which promoted same-sex rights, homosexual rights, and so this Citizen Go mobilized against it. But we also have other actors, like, for instance, the World Congress for Families, which was initially founded by US American and Russian actors, mainly also funded by churches. They're evangelicals and Orthodox churches, and they hold, I think, every second year conferences in which they mainly promote against reproductive rights of women, but also against gender. So there is a global, one could say, anti-gender right-wing complex, which is, of course, supported by financial organizations from the US, but also from other regions in the world. Not only right-wingers, but, as I said, pro-life activists are very active in this respect.
Mm-hmm. And on that, let's say that on that global map, we can maybe see what could be at the first glance a paradoxical phenomenon, and that is that is the rise of women figures that are let's say, being the representatives of the masculinist identity politics projects. So you claim that masculinity of right-wing populism isn't exclusively a male political stance, that certain women can also be bearers of its values. And we can add that it is rather successful. You know, you see Marine Le Pen, who, as we told, you were speaking about the like, let's say, the change between the old right wing and the new right wing, and that could maybe correspond to the generational switch from Jean-Marie Le Pen to Marine Le Pen, from old right-wing populism to the new one, and even we have the gender change, so we have the, you know, like from father to daughter, not to the son, but to the daughter. And then there is Giorgia Meloni, who is also interesting, for example, in Italy. And how do you explain the paradox according to which certain women promote and reinforce right-wing masculinity?
Yeah. You know, I would like to add to this group of right-wing politicians, Alice Weidel. She's the co-leader of the Alternative for Germany, and she's especially interesting. She is a woman. She's a lesbian living together with her partner and the children of her partner. So she's really exceptional, although I know she's not very much liked within the AfD. They wanted to push her out, but they somehow need her.
We have the same case, prime minister. So
yes, right. That's true. You have the same case. So
same or similar, let's say similar case.
Similar, yes. Yeah, but why these women? Well, of course, I think these women like Marine Le Pen, Giorgia Meloni, Alice Weidel, or also Frauke Petry. She was the first female leader of the Alternative for Germany before she was kicked out then. I think these women, they have learned their feminist lessons, and they wanted to seize leadership in their parties. So, and it was Marine Le Pen who pushed against her father, and it was also Frauke Petry who pushed against this male leadership of the Alternative for Germany. Yeah, so, and they wanted to seize power within these parties, and they do not want to stand in the, I don't know, second or fourth rank or whatever. They said, we want to take over leadership, and we are able to do and to take over leadership. Yeah, I think this is firstly very important. That of course there always have been women in right-wing extremist groups and also in the parties, but for a long time they did not want to seize power. But I think the more the parties gained votes, for instance, they saw that they might have that they can have also a political career in these parties, and even easier than in these old, long established and maybe encrusted structure of the old parties. So because these either the parties are new, like the Alternative for Germany is only 10 years old, or the parties already departed into this new right trajectory. And the women then saw the opportunity in this transformation process to get a political career. And the other issue what is discussed is that the party apparatus instrumentalize these women, because they want to win women votes. They know that they lack women votes, and if they thought then if they want to mobilize women as voters, maybe they need a more female face. So that's also a way why women got the opportunity to get into leadership position. But what is interesting, if we look at these women, so neither Marine Le Pen, nor Alice Weidel, nor Giorgia Meloni perform this mother type, which is part of the ideology of their parties, even though Giorgia Meloni campaigned in the election saying, I am a mother, I'm an Italian mother, and so on. Now what she performs is not a sort of motherly type of politics, you could say, but all these women perform a tough and what I would label masculinist form of politics, mainly just being exclusive, blaming those who are not competitive in neoliberal economy, and they really produce this antagonistic, masculinist propaganda against migrants, against gender and gender mainstreaming. And of course, if we just look, and there are some studies how they present themselves, so as masculinist, as wearing suits, just presenting them as tough and successful politicians. So this is why I would say a masculinist authoritarian style of politics has nothing to do with a gender. It can be performed by males and by women in the same way. It's something that you either can train or can learn, or how you are subjectivated in this political field as such.
Mm-hmm. All those, let's say, those gender issues are maybe relying on something even more structural, more structural element of those political projects is, and it is called othering, the creation of others. So if anti-genderism became an important element, as we have just heard, of politics of othering, but who are the others? Who are others, and how they all end up in the same melting pot? We mentioned migrants, we mentioned the LGBT population, we mentioned women, but there are even more other groups, the minoritarian other groups, and the others are significantly constructed also not as a part of us. They do not belong. That's their main characteristic. They're excluded. They're not the part of what they might call the national intimacy, or are simply seen as imported, some kind of a foreign body. Although the trope of the xenos is far from new, of course, what new affects do we see in relation to today's othering and the new cultures of rejection?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think these, as I said before, I think these processes of othering and of constructing the others and of excluding the other and at the same time creating the self, being it nativist people, being it a white group of men, or being it the alleged natural family, are not new processes, as you said. But what we see, it's part of the antagonistic strategy of the authoritarian right-wingers. So to construct what they think the people is, these white nativist people, they need to construct the other. And this is what I label as horizontal antagonism. And as you said, these others are, is a sort of moving target. It's mainly migrants, because the right wingers say they do not belong to our culture, their religion does not belong, and so on. They do not want to integrate, they create these parallel societies. That's why they should be excluded. That's why they are the foreigners, and their difference shouldn't be allowed. But it's also, as you said, LGBTIQ people and activists, because they do not belong due to their gender, due to sexuality. They disturb, again, this notion of the heterosexual family, for instance. But it's also feminists, because feminists, they destroy, again, the idea of a natural family, which is the basis for the nation. So there is a lot of othering going on. And of course, it's then depending on the situation, which group is targeted as these others. But what is clear is all these others that should not belong to the national community, that should be excluded, they are all presented as creating a danger to these nativist constructed people. Yeah. And this includes, of course, homophobic notion. It includes racist notions of othering. It includes a sort of ethno-pluralist idea that all ethnicities should exist, but they should stay in their countries of origin, whatever this means. But this is part of this very nativist and nationalistic idea of belonging and having access to rights. So what is new in this idea of constructing the others today is, I would say, it's more an affectivity that is, on the one hand, rejective, but on the other hand, creates this solidarity between a we, which is, as I said, constructed as the people. But what is also interesting is, I would say, is the context in which this happens. And this is why I think the notion, and this is again borrowed from Stuart Hall, the notion of a conjuncture is so important for today's othering. And with a conjunction, Hall refers to the point that societies go through different forms of crisis, mainly crises which are grounded in the capitalist organization of society. So it doesn't need to be only a fiscal crisis, but it's also, let's say, a crisis of social reproduction that we saw during the COVID pandemic in Europe. And that there is an actor, and this is these right-wing actor who sees these different crises and conjoins them into one narrative. And this is again the narrative of endangerment of the society, and especially the white nativist society. And so this is, I think, the interesting point. We can see that neoliberalism created a lot of crises over the last 30 years, and that these right-wingers are able to use and to create, one could say, a post-neoliberal, authoritarian, and I would add masculinist conjuncture. What is also interesting still, and that can make hope, is that at the same time, of course, we see a lot of newly emerging social justice movement, environmental movements which try to deal with a climate catastrophe. So I think what is also new is this simultaneity of othering, of excluding people on the one hand, and creating fear and affect of disgust and making people die in the Mediterranean. But on the other hand, that there are also movements which try to counter these otherings and which try to, also create, one could say, a new conjuncture saying, if we do not change climate policies, we will all be extincted. And I think this is the new form where this othering of the right is located, and where I see maybe also a little bit of hope that it is still a struggle about hegemony. And so othering is not just there, and it's not just the main, let's say, sentiment or atmosphere that is observable, but there is also struggle against this.
Yes, you have opened a whole new horizon that we could record another podcast on the topic, but maybe we should briefly close maybe within this scope. What could be the responses from what are the responses from the left? You mentioned some, but maybe you could develop a little bit from the left to this right-wing populist project, and what could be the possible answers that are not maybe yet offered, and how do we engage, let's say, to counter those phenomena without being reactionary ourselves, but by engaging on something that could maybe get those discourses out of their rails and just offer some new horizons, opening some new horizons. Do you see some possibilities for that, or we have a completely gloomy picture? It seems that it is not the case. So please, yes.
Well, that's the most difficult question, and of course it's the question which is most important. Which are strategies to counter this cultural hegemony? What the wrong strategy is to let's say divide a leftist project. And I see a lot of attempts to divide by blaming identity politics, by blaming cancel culture, and so on. Yeah, I think this is really a wrong strategy, because what a left emancipatory strategy needs is to join forces of different movements, different NGOs, different strands of fighting this right-wing hegemonic project. I think we still have to go on and say, well, there is a way of, let's say, individual autonomy, self-determination, which is not based in a sovereign idea of the freedom of the individual, but which is based on the grounds of solidarity, of care for each other, and of course, of care for oneself. And I think this is, let's say, a political project which seems maybe a little bit out of space, but I would say if this notion of care would be taken more serious, this could be a political project, because all those environmental activists, of course, they say, well, we have to take care about the environment. We have to see our position as human beings, not exploiting nature, but being part of nature. So, and therefore taking care of nature. We have to see that capitalist production always has ignored social reproduction and the issue of care. So in Germany, we now have a movement, even within trade unions, saying, yeah, well, we have to look at the care sector. This has been ignored for such a long time. So we have to mobilize people in the care sector, being in hospitals where the first strikes began, but also in 24-hour caretakers. They have to be unionized. So there is another idea of the relation of productive labor and reproductive labor. So these are, I think, projects and trajectories which could be taken into account. And then we have the different political groups and activists, migrant activists within unions, but also activists in the Mediterranean trying to save refugees. I have an idea, it's not a sort of rainbow coalition, but I think all these groups, LGBTIQ people fighting against discrimination, taking care for their own rights, and feminists, if they see that it's about reorganizing capitalism, to say it bluntly, yeah, not reorganize, but better to overcome this idea of a capitalist, patriarchal, heteronormative organization of society. And we should fight this. I think this could be a project which counters the authoritarian right, because it would then destroy their hegemonic projects. And I think this is what is needed, an alternative, also an effective, affective and emotional alternative to see that how taking care of each other might work, you know. And the welfare state in the 19th century aimed at trying to take care of the rights of the workers, yeah, and to establish, to institutionalize in the welfare state this taking care of workers' rights. Of course, this was a masculinist project in the 19th and the 20th century and excluded women for a long time from the welfare compromise. But it was the idea that capitalism needs to be embedded in social care structures. So I think we need something to reinvent this social infrastructure. And for me, this idea of a social infrastructure free for everybody would be an institutionalization of equality, of solidarity, and this might then disrupt and end the hegemonic project of the authoritarian right.
Great, yeah. We could then end on this let's say optimistic note or a hopeful note on care that could make intersectionality of struggles, as we like to say, possible and even more efficient. Anyway, thank you very much, Birgit Sauer, for being on our podcast, and it was really interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks.